The winter morning settled quietly over Washington City. A pale frost, softening rooftops, chimneys, and the half-finished cobblestone paths that snaked between government buildings. It was 1837, and though Congress still boasted proudly of America's growing strength, the mood outside their polished chambers hinted at a different reality, one written not in speeches or budgets, but in dust, broken wagons, abandoned farms, and the uncertain steps of families walking away from the Capitol in silence. Within the marble halls and echoing corridors of the Treasury Department, junior clerk Caleb Turner listened day after day to carefully worded optimism from men who seemed determined to pretend everything was fine. The panic of 1837 had shaken the nation's financial structure to its core, yet these same officials insisted that the crisis was only temporary. But outside their windows, Caleb saw a country slowly unraveling. Each morning, on his walk to the Treasury building, he saw carts rolling down Pennsylvania Avenue, carts stacked with wooden chairs tied by rope, sacks of bread crusts, pots blackened by years of use, and children bundled against the cold with scarves too thin for winter. Families weren't leaving in search of opportunity. They were fleeing the ashes of promises that had never materialized. Yet what confused Caleb most was the direction they went. Instead of following the main trade routes heading out of the city, many slipped quietly onto narrow wooded paths, unmarked roads leading west into terrain most officials didn't even acknowledge. One question grew inside Caleb like a stubborn seed. What lay along those forgotten roads that people were too afraid or too ashamed to speak about? One evening, unable to contain his curiosity, Caleb turned west instead of toward his boarding house. He followed the worn Georgetown road until it gradually thinned into a dirt path almost consumed by creeping vines and leaning trees. The dusk was heavy with fog, muffling the crunch of his boots. He walked for nearly half an hour before encountering a tall, weary man pulling a small wagon with only a metal box and a tattered Bible inside. "You're from the city," the stranger muttered without lifting his eyes. Caleb nodded. "Where are you heading?" The man tightened his grip on the wagon. "Farther than you're willing to walk. These roads don't forgive the curious." Then he leaned in close, his breath white in the cold. "Turn back while you can. Some things out here never reached the ears of Congress, and they ain't planning to." Before Caleb could speak, the man disappeared into the tightening fog, leaving those chilling words behind. The next evening, still unsettled, Caleb visited a tavern near the edge of the city, a smoky, dim-lit place where travelers spoke freely once the whiskey settled in. The tavern keeper, Margaret Doyle, eyed Caleb suspiciously. "Your government," she declared. "How did you know?" Caleb asked. "Government folks sit up straight and drink slow. Think before they swallow anything." Caleb barely managed to smile before asking about the western paths. The room fell silent. A man at the counter muttered, "Best not go pokin' where the country's wounds still bleed." Another said, "Government forgot those roads. Folks living on 'em haven't forgotten the government." Margaret leaned closer and whispered, "The old roads tell the truth, and Washington don't want to hear truth right now." When he asked what truth she meant, she replied that this country grew faster than it could carry its own people. Banks failed, land collapsed, dreams dried up. Folks out there ain't moving toward hope. They're running from disappointment. And if you walk those roads long enough, you'll meet both the living and the ghosts of towns that used to matter. Her words only deepened Caleb's determination. For the next several nights, he walked farther beyond the edges of Washington until he reached Harper's Crossing, a town shown on older maps but completely absent on the new ones printed by the government. Half the building stood abandoned, doors hanging crookedly off rusting hinges. A church steeple leaned like a tired old man. Caleb found a woman sweeping an empty porch, though the house behind her was clearly uninhabited. "Do people still live here?" he asked. She paused mid-sweep. "People leave. They always leave. Town wasn't built to be forgotten, but the country forgot us anyway." When Caleb asked why, she glanced toward the faint glow of the Capitol. "Because the city keeps marching forward, and we're what it left behind." The more he explored, the more unsettling truths he uncovered. One night, he stumbled upon a barn illuminated by lantern light. Inside sat a group of men writing names into a large leather-bound ledger. They froze when Caleb stepped inside. "You don't belong here," one warned. But Caleb simply said, "I want to understand." The eldest man handed him the ledger. Inside were hundreds upon hundreds of names, families ruined by bank closures, farmers whose land had been seized, factory workers left jobless. "These are the folks heading west," the old man said. "They sign their names so if they don't return, someone at least knows they lived." Caleb felt a cold weight settle over him.
"Why might they not return?" he asked. The man sighed deeply. "Because the roads take more than they give. Bandits, illness, cold, starvation. But the worst is hopelessness. Washington's got numbers, we've got names." A few nights later, Caleb witnessed the danger firsthand. At Red Creek, 3 armed bandits surrounded an elderly man's wagon, demanding everything he had. Caleb hid behind a tree, heart hammering, as they beat the man and ransacked his belongings. After they left, Caleb rushed forward and helped the injured man climb back onto his wagon. "They do this every night," the man groaned. "Ain't no sheriff out here no more. Washington don't care what happens this far out." It was then Caleb realized something terrible. These roads weren't forgotten by accident. They were abandoned. Caleb continued following the Western migrants who traveled in groups for safety. At night, they lit fires, not only for warmth, but as a defense against wolves, both the 4-legged and the 2-legged kind. Gunshots often echoed from the woods. Children huddled close to their parents. The desperation was palpable. One man told Caleb, "We're not looking for promise out here, just a place where the world stopped kicking us." His investigations eventually drew the attention of the Red Creek bandits. One night they ambushed him, dragging him into a clearing. "Why's a city man snooping around where he ain't wanted?" the leader demanded. Caleb, bruised but defiant, replied, "People are suffering. I'm trying to understand why." The bandit laughed bitterly. "Because Washington eats its own. Out here, we just do what the city taught us. Take what we can before someone else does." They spared his life, but their final warning haunted him. "Go back to your marble buildings. Tell them the roads belong to us now." Shaken, Caleb returned to Washington determined to report everything he had seen. Abandoned towns, criminal territories, starving families, but his superiors dismissed him with polite, hollow phrases. "These matters lie outside our jurisdiction," one murmured. "The country is resilient," another said. "People move. Times change." That was then Caleb understood the deepest truth. Washington wasn't unaware, it was unwilling. The next morning at dawn, Caleb walked west again, not as a clerk bound by silence, but as a witness to a nation's hidden suffering. He carried a notebook and a growing determination. Farmers invited him into their collapsing homes. Widows described how their husbands had died. Children pointed out where their schools once stood. He wrote down every story, every loss, every forgotten hope. He no longer felt like a government worker, but like the keeper of truths the country refused to see. At the Potomac's western branch, he encountered a broken bridge that once connected 2 bustling settlements. Now its beams lay half submerged in icy water. A young mother stood beside it with her children. "This bridge was our future," she said. "Before it fell, we had trade, visitors, life. Now we have silence." Caleb wrote her words with trembling hands. Winter grew harsher. Many travelers froze along the roads. Caleb gave away half his savings to families in need. He helped bury strangers whose names he'd never know. He tended to sick children.
He warmed the hands of elderly farmers by campfires. Every act of kindness deepened his resolve. By early spring, he compiled everything into a relentless, scathing report: maps, testimonies, descriptions of violence, evidence of government neglect. He sent it to newspapers across the nation. Within days, headlines erupted: "A clerk exposes the forgotten frontier," "The roads America left behind," "Voices from the shadows of Washington." Congress had no choice but to respond. Investigations were launched. Troops were sent west to drive out bandits. Aid arrived for neglected towns. For the first time, the forgotten roads beyond Washington were acknowledged as part of the nation. Months later, Caleb stood on a hill overlooking a town that had begun slowly rebuilding. New beams replaced broken ones. Farmers repaired roofs. Children played in the muddy streets. For the first time in months, hope flowed through the air like spring wind. As he watched the sun rise over the recovering land, Caleb understood something quietly profound. History was not shaped only by speeches or laws, but by those who dared to walk the forgotten roads and carry the voices of the unseen into the light. And on that hill, with his notebook tucked beneath his arm, Caleb Turner finally realized that he had not just documented history, he had walked into it.